feel very spyish with this thing on. So as you can tell, I am not Pastor Phil. He had asked Jason to minister this morning, but, in typical God fashion, plot twist, you got me. Jim, I love this bumper video. Is that what they're called, bumper videos? I just love it. You do such a good job with those. Where is he? Am I just talking to... There he is. I think because it reminds me of me, like my dad would take me fishing when I was little, and I'd be the kid throwing crap into the lake. And he'd be like, stop doing that, you're scaring off all the fish. So whatever. But I love that bumper video. Jim, you do such a good job. So, as most of you or some of you may know, I am a middle school librarian by day and a professional Uber driver by night. I've got really bossy clientele. They don't tip at all. They're very bossy, but, it's the sophisticated life that I have. So be jealous if you want. But because I do sling books, it's the story that I love. I want to know people's story. We were in Asheville one time, and we were down at the Drum Circle, if you've ever been there, and we love Asheville. And there was this guy, I don't even know how, I wish I had a picture, because I took a picture of him, and of course I went up and talked to him, and his name's Christopher, and I learned all of his story, and he was dressed like, I don't know, it's almost like he was a homeless man, and it's almost like everything he found along the way in his life, he picked it up and put it on him, okay? So he was just very eccentric looking, and I looked at Jason, I said, I want to know his story, like, how did he get here? How did he get like that? And he was so fascinating. And every time we go back to Asheville, I look for him. So I love people's story, and I love the story. So settle in, kids. I'm going to tell you a story, okay? Once upon a time, there was a house. This house wasn't much. In fact, most people would look at it and say it was a shack, okay? It held only a handful of rooms. It had really weak, thin floors. It creaked, it bowed when you stepped on it. The windows were really drafty. The swollen roof line just made it so you pulled up to it and you're just like, ugh, I don't know if I want to go in there. Now, the walls of this little dingy house held lots of things. It held decades of secrets between siblings, shouts of joy, shouts in anger, voices raised in song, lots of birthday celebrations, promises made, and a lot of promises broken. Sunday dinners, fights fueled by pride, anger, alcohol, new babies carried over that threshold, and over that same threshold, the tears of final goodbyes of some loved ones. Parents, children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren all opened and closed that same thin, crooked metal door. A couple characters of this house was a woman and a little boy. Now, while the woman was a grandmother, she was frail in body. She was not frail in spirit. Those walls also held decades of prayers that made the veil of heaven as thin as silk. And this little boy, he experienced a lot of pain in this house and a lot of shame also. But he also bore witness to the obedience of his grandmother, to her God. Now, while this house is gone, condemned by the city and quickly torn down, there was a ripple that was set into motion by a handful of decades beforehand by a singular praying grandmother. Scott, do you have that picture that you can show us? I don't know. We'll see it. So, this week, this plot of land that you see here, along with the house across the street and 16 other lots surrounding it, Jason, once sickly and backward, weak at times fearful and rebellious, he now stands on that same property of his childhood as a strong, faithful, redeemed child of God. Now, not saying that we're real estate tycoons, okay? Or that we're leaving an inheritance of millions in property to our kids. Sorry, that's not going to be there. I mean, it might be. Jason's probably thinking, not with that attitude. But God, being the sweet and tender Redeemer of all things, and taking the action of obedience by Jason's grandmother, set into motion a ripple that we experience today, and that we will continue for Max and Ellie, Reagan and Phoebe, for their children and their children's children, and so on until eternity stops that ripple. That excites me, you guys. Amen. Never in a million years. I know Jason, we haven't really talked a whole lot about it because he's kind of like businessy about this whole purchase, and I've just kind of been like sitting back saying, okay, whatever you want to do, I don't really care. He's like, can you please care about this? And it didn't really hit me. It didn't really hit me until he took me over there to tour the property that what was happening. And I think, I'd been in this little house with Jason growing up when we were dating, and, I didn't think anything of it. I don't care about things like that. And he always jokes how he was raised poor, and I was the middle-class Benetton kid, and he was the low-class kid who shopped at Kmart, okay? But when I would go to that house, I didn't see all that things because I saw the heart of Mama and how much she loved the people who came in that house. Now, I love this series that Pastor Phil has been preaching on, the ripples, because all it takes, it has shown us that all it takes is one act of obedience to cause that ripple effect. Now, Newton's third law of motion says that every action has an equal and opposite reaction, that ripple will continue indefinitely until something. I think I went off. Did I go off? Okay. That when you throw a rock into a body of water like ornery 8-year-old Jill Kendrick did, okay? When you throw a rock into the water, that's the action. And it will continue until the ripple reaches the shoreline. The shoreline is that opposite reaction. It stops that ripple from happening. Now, so what I want to ask you today, and I want you to think about this today and here on out, how big is your body of water? I met a man at Walmart, because that's just what I do, okay? I see people and I talk to them, and it drives Jason crazy. He'll be like, can we please go in here and you not talk to anyone? And I'm like, no, I'm not going to promise that. If you have a dog in your little motorized scooter, I'm going to stop and talk to you, and I'll probably take a picture of you and your dog and me. So, I had met this man at Walmart, and he had a bag full of goldfish. And I said, oh, that's awesome. I said, do you have little kids at home? He's like, no, this is for my pond out front. And I'm like, you're going to put goldfish in a pond outside? He said, yeah, because whatever their environment is, they will grow to meet that environment. So if you've got a little baby fish bowl, that's as big as they're going to get. But if you put them in a larger pond, they're going to grow to meet that environment. And I'm like, that is fascinating. Never knew that. And so the same applies to us in our daily lives. If you, whatever you are faced with, or whatever you're going through or thinking about or struggling with, sometimes we put limits on God. Right. And sometimes we limit what we believe God for because our thinking is just too small. Now, what boundaries have you subconsciously put around yourself and ultimately on God? Now, if you would turn to the book of Ruth, chapter 1. I love this story. In fact, it was one of our wedding scriptures. Little Kirby Hensley, well, she's not Hens, she was Smith then. Murph and Tina's little girl, she read this at our wedding. She was so tiny, and now she has babies of her own. She read this, and it's just so beautiful. Now, I'll read this. You follow along with me. If you don't already know this story of Ruth and Naomi and Orpah, I'd like to introduce you to them. These are some ripple-making women. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, and his wife's name was Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah. And they went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left there with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. After they lived there for about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Verse 6, when Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud and said to her, "We will go back with you and your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband, even if I thought there was still hope for me. Even if I had a husband tonight and gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." At this, they wept aloud again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, and Ruth clung to her. But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you will go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, even if death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. So the 2 women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them, and the women exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi?" So, in a nutshell, Ruth was married to one of 2 brothers, okay? All of the men in this family died, leaving behind 3 widows. Naomi is the mother. Ruth and Orpah, the daughters-in-law, they were Moabite princesses in their town, or in their country of Moab, because remember, Naomi's family had moved down to Moab. Naomi begged these daughters to go back to their homeland, to their family, so they can have a chance to remarry and start all over. Sadness had gotten them to this point, but there was still hope for the 2 daughters. Their hearts were broken and their tears were many. Orpah, she cashed her bus ticket and left town. Ruth refused. So off Naomi and Ruth went, returning to the homeland of Naomi in Judah. This was not Ruth's hometown. Now, I don't know what your relationship is with your mother-in-law. You may have reacted if you were faced with this situation. You may have acted just like Ruth and clung to your mother-in-law and said, girl, I am with you in this. I am not leaving. We are in this together. You're stuck with me. Okay? Now, a lot of you may be thinking, thanks for the memories, lady. Best of luck to you. Peace out. Okay? But Ruth clung to Naomi. She wept at her side. Made a big scene. Very dramatic. Okay? She ain't leaving. Through a series of God-ordained events, Ruth falls in love with Boaz, and her life is forever changed. Boaz was a family member of her husband, okay? And so he was her kinsman redeemer. Because back then, women weren't anything without their husband. And so someone had to redeem Ruth's name. And Boaz was that family member. She wasn't related to him by blood, but by marriage. Now, Ruth, because of this arrangement, this relationship, she goes down in history forever as being the grandmother of David and ultimately Jesus Christ. One choice changed history. She chose to be faithful. Now, what about Orpah? Okay, she's gone back to her homeland. She's gone back to Moab. She is Ruth's sister-in-law, but forsaking her mother-in-law, following her wishes, she goes back to her homeland. She was not about to starve to death when she had a wealthy family, a royal family back home in Moab. Now, history states that she did in fact remarry. It was more of a political alliance than a feet-sweeping romance like Ruth experienced with Boaz. And she bore her husband some sons. Orpah did. 4 big sons. Have you ever heard of Goliath? In a not so ironic turn of events, Goliath was taken down by a little shepherd boy, David, the great grandson of Ruth and Boaz. Orpah's other 3 sons, in order to vindicate his big brother's death, had tried to also take on David's army, and they all failed. Now, because of Ruth's faithfulness, unlike the people of Israel, who were forgetful and prone to wander, we have this saving knowledge of Jesus. Now, what if she would have hightailed it back home with Orpah? That's what Naomi wanted. History would have been completely changed. There would have been no Boaz. There would have been no, it's in Matthew, the lineage of Jesus. There would have been no Obed, I believe it is. And let's look here. Here it is. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed, the father of Jesse. And Jesse, the father of King David. Had there not been a Ruth and Boaz, there would have never been an Obed, a Jesse, or a King David. One decision, one rock, one ripple. History would have been completely changed. Eternity would have been completely altered. Ruth's faithfulness and her one act of obedience to her mother-in-law and to her mother-in-law's God was the missing link. Now, you may be thinking, oh, that's great. Ruth married Boaz. Jason had a praying grandmother. They lived happily ever after. That's great, Jill. I didn't have anyone to redeem me. I didn't have a praying grandmother. No, but you could be that person who redeems somebody. Amen. Or you could be the person who is a praying grandmother or a praying mother. Now, Mama, she passed away, and Phoebe was about 3 years old. Mama never got to see Ellie and Phoebe, and I think Reagan had been baptized. she didn't get to see them baptized. Mama didn't get to see the money that Reagan raised for Haiti and the well that he has over with John Hanson. Mama hasn't gotten to see Jason work in the role of ministry that he is right now. She hasn't gotten to see what's going to happen. And Jason's often said this: are you willing to work for something? Are you willing to sacrifice for something? Are you willing to believe for something that you'll never see? Because it takes sacrifice. A lot of times we want it yesterday, right? We want our prayers answered yesterday, and sometimes that just doesn't happen. That happened in Mama's case. We're believing for our oldest son's Max, his salvation, and I may never see it, to be quite honest. And I've got to be okay with that. I've got to be okay that the God of the universe, the God who crafted him in my body, is in control of him.
Yes, amen.
And you have to be okay with that too. Because God is in control. He is waiting. I have a picture of him, kind of like a little kid, hanging over top of heaven like this, looking down at us, just waiting to give us what he wants, not what we want. Waiting to give us Max's salvation.
Amen.
He's waiting on Max.
Yes.
He is waiting on Max's heart to be melted and for him to come to the realization that he needs him in his life. Yeah. And it's not like Russian roulette or, playing craps in Vegas, okay? It's not just up to random selection. God wants all this for us.
Yes,
and I don't want to get to heaven and God say, well done, thou good and faithful servant. Now, you did a lot of great things, but here's all I had for you. But you wouldn't trust me with it. Your lake was too small. Your body of water was too small. I don't want that to happen to us in our church either. I want us as a body of believers, as a family, to think big, to stretch out our borders, to stretch out our shoreline so we can see all the big things that God has for us. Yes. How far is that ripple going to go? By our single act of obedience, by throwing that proverbial rock into the water. How far can God take that? It's up to us. Right. It's up to us because he's a gentleman. He's not going to force us and push anything on us. Amen. Now, Ruth's faithfulness in one act of obedience to her mother was the missing link. You are someone's missing link. The ripple of eternity could be hinging on your faithfulness, your one act of obedience. Your family tree could be forever changed just by one choice that you make. Today, I want to challenge you to widen your body of water. Allow God to really surprise you and to choose the ripple. God is waiting, and he's ready for you to do that. Thank you all for letting me minister to you today. I pray that we go out of here encouraged and challenged. I'm thankful for our church and for the things that God's going to do here, the things that he has done here, and for what's to come if we just allow him to do it. Let's pray.